I've spent most of my life on the run. Not from people, not from responsibilities, but from something far more intimate, far more dangerous, from myself, from a part of me I was too terrified to face, too ashamed to acknowledge. There's a darkness within me, not a monstrous villain lurking in the shadows, but something quieter, something more familiar. It's a storm of emotions that I learned early on were too much. The rage that would rise when I felt invisible, the grief that choked my throat when I lost something I loved, the shame that crept in every time I made a mistake. I didn't know what to do with those feelings, so I did what I thought was right. I buried them. I pushed them down, locked them behind polite smiles, and practiced silence. I became the master of pretending. To the world, I was composed, controlled, strong. But beneath that surface was a war zone, an internal battlefield littered with parts of myself I refused to claim. I was taught, like so many of us, that certain emotions made me weak, that tears were embarrassing, that anger was dangerous, that fear should never be spoken aloud. So I adapted. I learned how to turn off the alarm bells ringing inside me. I learned how to make my face still when I was falling apart. I learned how to be what the world wanted, likable, agreeable, fine. But that's the lie, isn't it? The performance of being okay when you're anything but. Every time I said, I'm fine, I was abandoning another part of me. Every time I swallowed my truth to avoid making others uncomfortable, I chipped away at my own sense of wholeness. And over time, those pieces I cast aside began to speak. Not in words, but in ways I couldn't ignore. They showed up as anxiety that never slept, as sudden bursts of irritation I couldn't explain, as exhaustion so heavy it felt like dragging my body through wet cement. I didn't realize it at the time, but my shadow, those castaway parts of me, were demanding to be seen. I didn't want to face them. I thought if I just kept running, I could outpace the ache. If I stayed busy, distracted, productive, I wouldn't have to listen to the voice that whispered, "You're not being honest with yourself." But you can't outrun what lives inside you. You can numb it, avoid it, outperform it. But it will wait, patiently, persistently, and eventually it will make itself heard. I remember nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling like I was slowly disappearing. I wasn't sad in the obvious way. I was just disconnected from others, from myself. I felt like a stranger wearing a costume that didn't quite fit. I laughed when I didn't feel joy. I apologized when I wasn't at fault. I said yes when I meant no. I became an expert at shape-shifting just to avoid conflict or rejection. I was afraid, terrified, really, of what would happen if I showed people the truth. Not just the parts I polished for approval, but the raw, messy, angry, scared, uncertain version of me. Would they leave? Would they mock me? Would they call me unstable or too sensitive? So I made myself small. I convinced myself that silence was safer than honesty. And in doing so, I built a prison made of pleasing others, a cage of compliance where my real voice couldn't breathe. The truth? The version of me that smiled through the pain, that minimized my own needs, that carried the weight of everyone else's comfort. That version of me wasn't strong. She was exhausted. She was lonely. She was screaming inside a shell no one could see through. And yet even in that shell, my shadow didn't vanish. It grew, not louder but heavier. It soaked into my bones. It began to color everything, my relationships, my work, my view of myself. I became afraid of stillness because in silence the truth echoed, that I was angry, that I was grieving, that I was hiding, and no one else could fix it but me. This part of the story isn't dramatic. There was no huge collapse, no big scene, just a slow unraveling, a steady realization that I was disappearing beneath my own disguise, and somewhere deep inside, a whisper. This can't be all there is. You're not meant to live disconnected from yourself. It was that whisper that changed everything. Not because I understood what to do next, but because I finally stopped pretending I was fine. I let myself admit the truth. Not to anyone else but to me. That I was tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of shrinking to make others comfortable. That was the beginning. Not of healing yet, but of truth. Of returning to the place I'd buried myself. Of unlocking the door I'd shut so tightly for so long. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't instant. But it was real. And real is what I needed. It didn't happen all at once. No lightning bolt moment. No profound spiritual awakening. Just a quiet evening. A slow breath. A mirror I couldn't look away from anymore. That day, I sat with myself, not with distractions, not with noise, not with someone else's expectations crowding my mind, just me, alone with every part I had tried to silence. It was terrifying, not because I feared the world outside, but because I feared what I would find within. I expected monsters, ugly, twisted parts of me that would confirm all the worst things I'd believed about myself. That I was broken, unworthy, a failure in disguise. But what I saw wasn't monstrous. It was human, so heartbreakingly human. A younger version of me, tired, scared, unseen, not demanding attention, just aching to be understood. She wasn't screaming. She was whispering, "Please, don't leave me behind again." And I realized I had been abandoning myself for years. Every time I pushed through exhaustion instead of resting. Every time I laughed to deflect my pain. Every time I said, "It's okay," when it clearly wasn't. Every time I punished myself for needing too much, feeling too deeply, reacting too strongly. I didn't just suppress emotions. I rejected entire versions of myself. The one who cried too easily, the one who needed reassurance, the one who got jealous or angry or scared, the one who didn't know what to do. I tried to kill those versions, not with violence, but with silence. I buried them in shame and told myself that was maturity. That was strength. But maturity isn't the absence of emotion. It's the ability to hold it without judgment. And I had no idea how to do that, because all I'd ever been taught was control. Control your anger. It makes you dangerous. Control your sadness. It makes you weak. Control your fear. It makes you unstable. So I did. I controlled it all, until control became a prison. And when the walls started cracking, when my shadow began to leak through, I didn't know how to handle it. I panicked. I overcompensated. I became hyperproductive, emotionally numb, and quietly furious all the time. Because somewhere deep down, I still believed that if I could be enough, all this messiness would go away. But it didn't. It got worse. No matter how hard I tried to outrun it, my shadow followed me. It showed up in relationships, in how I pushed people away the moment they got too close. It showed up in my work, in how I tied my worth to performance. It showed up in my inner voice, harsh, critical, never satisfied. No matter how much I achieved, it whispered, still not enough. I couldn't hide anymore. The mirror didn't lie, and in that honesty, something shifted, not all at once, but like a door slowly creaking open. I began to ask myself questions I had spent years avoiding. Why does this anger keep resurfacing? What am I really afraid of? Whose standards am I trying to live up to? When did I learn that my needs were too much? And the hardest one of all, who was I before I started hiding? These weren't questions with easy answers. Some of them didn't have answers at all. But the act of asking, the willingness to sit with discomfort, was a beginning. I stopped labeling emotions as good or bad. Instead, I began to listen to them. Not every feeling is a fact, but every feeling is a signal. My anger wasn't just rage. It was a boundary being violated. My sadness wasn't weakness. It was a wound asking for care. My fear wasn't failure. It was vulnerability, begging not to be dismissed. I realized something else, too, that shame grows in silence, that the more I hide something, the more power it holds over me. So I began speaking the unspeakable, to myself first. I admitted I was angry. I said it out loud. I admitted I was grieving, even if I couldn't name the loss. I admitted I was tired of pretending. I didn't become fearless overnight. But I became honest. And honesty, I've learned, is the gateway to everything. Once you tell the truth, to yourself, something opens. The shame begins to fade. The fear begins to shrink. And the parts of you that have been starving for love start to breathe again. My shadow wasn't the enemy. It was a mirror, reflecting every emotion I had exiled in order to be acceptable. And the more I looked, the more I recognized myself. Not the version I showed the world, but the real one underneath. There's something deeply humbling about facing yourself. You start to realize how many parts of you were never broken, just abandoned. How many feelings weren't toxic, just unprocessed. How many needs weren't unreasonable, they were just unmet. This is what healing begins to look like. Not the picture-perfect transformation, but the quiet return to wholeness. The low, painful, liberating process of remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. Something unexpected began to happen as I stopped resisting myself. The more I leaned in, the less I feared what I found. Not because the emotions were comfortable. They weren't. But because they finally had space to breathe. For so long, I had assumed that the difficult parts of me were defects, that if I could just cut them out, like bad code, I'd be a better version of myself. But the truth was far more profound. These parts weren't flawed. They were trying to help me survive. Anger had never been my enemy. It was the signal that I was reaching a limit, that something felt unfair, and my voice deserved to be heard. Grief wasn't weakness. It was love with nowhere to go. Sadness wasn't failure. It was a cry for slowing down, a message to rest and reconnect. Even shame, when seen clearly, pointed to moments where I needed compassion, not correction. For the first time, I stopped asking, how do I get rid of this? And started asking, what is this emotion trying to tell me? That shift, so simple, was everything. Because once I stopped labeling feelings as wrong, I could begin to listen. And in that listening, I found power. My anger, once buried and toxic, became the fuel for boundaries. It helped me say, no more, when something crossed the line. It helped me speak up when I would have stayed silent. It helped me protect the younger version of me who had gone unprotected for too long. Sadness no longer meant spiraling into despair. It became an invitation to slow down, to feel, to process, to remember that softness wasn't the opposite of strength. It was its companion. Fear, once overwhelming, became a map. A compass pointing me toward where I needed healing. A reminder that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward anyway. Even envy, one of the emotions I used to deny the most, became insight. Not proof that I was petty or insecure, but that there was something I deeply longed for. Envy became a guide to the parts of my life I had neglected. When I stopped punishing myself for feeling, my inner world became less chaotic. Not perfectly calm, but coherent. The internal war I had waged for years started to quiet down, and something else began to grow in the space that self-hatred used to occupy. Curiosity. I started to ask myself new questions. What if my shadow wasn't a problem to solve, but a story to understand? What if every emotion was just a messenger? What if the parts I had hidden were holding gifts, waiting for me to reclaim them? Because that's what I started to see. That everything I had disowned, my intensity, my sensitivity, my messiness, was also where my strength lived. The ability to feel deeply wasn't a flaw. It was the foundation of empathy. It was the reason I could sit with others in their pain and not look away. It was why I could speak from the heart, write from the gut, and connect beyond surface-level small talk. The emotions I once saw as liabilities became superpowers, once integrated. They gave me clarity, they gave me passion, they made me real. We live in a world that rewards detachment. We're taught to stay in control, to be unbothered, to rise above. But I've learned that real freedom isn't found in numbing out. It's found in waking up. You can't selectively numb emotions. When you shut down sadness, you also lose joy. When you bury grief, you muffle gratitude. When you avoid fear, you shrink your capacity for wonder. So I stopped choosing half-life. I stopped choosing safety over aliveness. Instead, I chose wholeness. And wholeness required welcoming everything, especially the parts that made me uncomfortable, especially the feelings I'd been told were too much. Here's the irony. The more I accepted my shadow, the less it controlled me. What once ruled me in silence now sat beside me as a guide. Because integration is not erasure, it's inclusion. It's saying to every abandoned part of yourself, you belong here. You never stopped belonging. That was the true turning point for me. I stopped running, not because I no longer felt pain, but because I knew I didn't have to run from it anymore. I could meet it, hold it, learn from it, and keep going, whole, grounded, aware. I finally understood that my shadow didn't want to destroy me. It wanted to protect me. It just didn't know how. It had been screaming because I never listened. And once I did, it softened. So did I. This process isn't linear. Some days I still retreat, still shut down, still fall into old habits. But now I come back quicker, with less shame, with more kindness, with more honesty, because I know what's waiting for me on the other side of that fear. Truth. And I would rather live in truth, messy and honest, than behind a polished mask. This is the paradox of shadow work. When you turn toward what you fear, you find who you truly are. Not just the version shaped by survival, but the one built for liberation. There's a moment in healing, one that doesn't come with fanfare or flashing lights, when you realize you've stopped apologizing for existing. You no longer shrink to make others comfortable. You no longer rearrange your truth to fit someone else's expectation. You no longer abandon yourself to be chosen. That moment came slowly for me. There was no grand breakthrough, no overnight transformation, just small, quiet choices made over time. Choices that said, I will no longer betray myself. I stopped performing, stopped curating myself into digestible pieces, stopped playing roles I never signed up for. Instead, I started showing up as I am, messy, honest, whole. Wholeness didn't mean perfection. It meant inclusion. It meant making space for all of me, the strong and the scared, the radiant and the raw. I didn't become a different person. I just stopped trying to be someone I wasn't. And in that space, something miraculous happened. I began to feel free. Not the kind of freedom sold in self-help books or marketed as a lifestyle. Not the curated illusion of having it all together, but the quiet, steady knowing that I belong to myself. That I can trust my voice, that I can honor my limits, that I can be soft and still be powerful, that I can take up space without guilt. For the first time in my life, I felt rooted, not in who others needed me to be, but in who I actually am. There was a calm that came with it, a calm not born of absence of struggle, but of alignment. I wasn't fighting myself anymore, and that inner war, so long a constant hum in the background, began to fade. The irony? When I stopped trying to fix myself, I finally began to heal. Because it was never about becoming better. It was always about remembering who I was before I was told I wasn't enough. So many of us spend our lives trying to be lovable. We shapeshift, overcompensate, hustle for approval. But love, real love, doesn't require a mask. It doesn't ask you to be flawless. It asks you to be authentic. That's what integration taught me. That my value isn't conditional. That my worth isn't earned through perfection or performance. That I was never too much. That I am not hard to love. And when I finally offered that kind of love to myself, unconditional, curious, patient, my world changed. Not because everything got easier, but because I stopped waiting for someone else to save me. I became the one I was waiting for. I became the safety I'd been searching for in others. I became the home I never thought I'd have. This doesn't mean I don't still struggle. I do. There are days I fall back into old stories, days I doubt, days I want to disappear. But the difference now? I don't abandon myself in those moments. I sit with the fear. I hold space for the grief. I speak gently to the parts of me that still feel fragile. Because I've learned that tenderness is strength, that vulnerability is courage, that softness is not weakness. It's a form of resilience, too. We were never meant to be hardened. We were never meant to be untouched by life. We were meant to feel, to break open and rebuild, to lose ourselves and come back wiser. There's a depth to living this way, an aliveness that can't be faked. When you stop numbing, you start noticing. The way your breath feels when it's unburdened, the sound of your own voice, unfiltered, the lightness of moving through the world without armor. And the beauty? It's real, not polished, not perfect, but vivid and raw and honest. That's the kind of life I want now, not one that looks impressive, but one that feels real. A life where I tell the truth, even when my voice shakes. A life where I rest without guilt. Where I laugh from the gut and cry without shame. Where I allow others to see me. Not a curated image, but my actual self. Because when you've made peace with your shadow, you stop fearing your reflection. You stop seeking validation from those who only love the filtered version of you. You stop pretending. You start living. I used to think freedom was the absence of pain. Now I know it's the presence of wholeness. Freedom is saying, I accept every part of me, especially the ones I used to hide. Freedom is no longer chasing who you think you should be. It's resting in who you already are. This is what coming home feels like. Not to a place, but to a self. The self that was never broken, only buried. The self that was always waiting, patiently, to be remembered. So if you're reading this and still running, still hiding, still carrying the weight of shame, you're not alone. You don't have to keep wearing the mask. You don't have to keep fighting yourself. You get to come home, too. You get to sit with the anger, the grief, the longing, and not be consumed by it. You get to let your emotions speak and know that they don't define you. They guide you. This is your invitation, not to change, but to return. To the truth that has always lived inside you. To the version of you that is not polished, but powerful. Not perfect, but present. Not finished, but whole. You are not your pain. You are the space that can hold pain and still choose compassion. You are not your mistakes. You are the awareness that grew from them. You are not too much. You are exactly the right amount. And you don't need to be anything else. This is your permission slip. To exhale. To feel. To stop performing. To belong to yourself. Without apology. Welcome home, not to the beginning, but to the part of the journey where you no longer fear the path. Because you finally found your footing. Not because the road is easy, but because you know who's walking it now. You. The whole, radiant, honest, powerful you.